"Susie, get ready for church." My father's booming command shook me from my sleep. I was raised in a strict Catholic family where I went to Mass every Sunday morning, no matter how much arguing and complaining preceded the actual service. I did 11 years hard time in Catholic school and even had a job answering phones at a convent. My life was framed by the church and a traditional family structure. Stay-at-home mom, dad at the office, a picture window life in Midwestern suburbia. After college, I got a job in New Jersey working for AT&T. I was 26 and far from home. I didn't really know anyone there outside the office. I was dating a guy in my office, but the relationship was ending. I knew he wasn't the one. Then, early one morning, sitting on the edge of my bed, I got the call. Not a religious calling, though. I wasn't a perfect Catholic. I also believed in the Girl Scout motto, "Be prepared." But nothing prepared me for what I was about to hear. My little pack of 99% effective birth control pills had failed in spectacular fashion. The nurse asked, "Are you planning to keep this pregnancy?" I hung up, stunned. I went to work and walked over to my boyfriend's side of the floor. He had a bunch of people in his cubicle chatting away, but seeing my face, he sent them scattering. I asked him to keep it quiet, but immediately the entire office knew. I don't know how word got out, but I had become the elephant in the room, and I felt like I was on exhibit. I felt I had no other choice but to have my baby. I told people it's because I'm Catholic, but it was more than that. With a science degree, I knew too much about what was already happening in me. And despite being completely unprepared, the one thing I was sure of was I wanted my child to know they were always wanted. I considered not telling my parents until there was an actual baby to deflect attention away from their wayward daughter. I was living several states away, hardly saw them anyway, so it could have worked. But all those years with the nuns must have had some impact. I decided to confess. When I was 3 months pregnant, I flew home, stayed with a girlfriend. I wasn't that brave. And then worked up the courage to drive over and give them the news. My father sat stone-faced in his chair and said absolutely nothing. I was too scared to ask what he was thinking. My mother shoved a bunch of flowers at me and said, "Congratulations." I couldn't wait to get out of there. I retreated back to New Jersey, feeling more isolated than ever. The baby's father and I tried to force our relationship to work, but it was as uncomfortable as maternity pants. He kept his distance, and the gossip mill at work just kept growing with me. I had been stick-figure thin, but gained 80 pounds during the pregnancy. I often cried myself to sleep. Here was an experience that was meant to be shared with someone you love, but I was basically on my own. My child's father started seeing another woman. Everyone at the office knew except me. On my daughter's birthday, I delivered a strong and healthy child. Then the room started spinning. I started to bleed out. Suddenly, I was up on the ceiling, looking down at my own body. Everyone seemed very busy down there, and there was blood everywhere. The doctor eventually saved my life, but I was so weak it was 5 days before I could leave the hospital. My family wanted to see the baby, so 6 weeks later, already thin again, I packed her up and headed home for a few days. My father, perhaps to avoid the awkwardness of the previous trip, arranged activities to fill every waking moment. When he asked his friend Steve, the director of the Detroit Zoo, to give us a behind-the-scenes tour, he didn't realize he was playing matchmaker. Steve drove us around in a golf cart in the warm July sunshine. He was about 15 years older than I, and it was clear right away he liked me. He took us to see some baby snow leopards who were being allowed to take a peek outside their mother's den for the very first time. They opened the doors, and the little ones poked their heads up to see the sun and the big world all around them. Back in New Jersey, I returned to work when my daughter was only 10 weeks old. I'd get up at 5 a.m. to feed her, take her to daycare, go to work, then pick her up, feed her again, and fall asleep exhausted. I missed the fun and freedom I had before she was born. Then I received a note from Steve. "I really enjoyed meeting you," he wrote. "I'm hoping you might like to see me again." I thought, this is my chance. This is my chance to find some happiness, to let my wild side out again. And we began a long-distance relationship. Dating him was like dating Tarzan. His house was on zoo property, away from the public areas. Steve liked to walk around inside it naked. It was filled with images of wild animals, artifacts from around the world, and a wandering box turtle. I felt transported to another place and time. There were no sideways looks from coworkers or ex-boyfriends. No one knew me. And instead of muted office sounds, I was comforted by the loud calls of wild creatures and a fascinating man who didn't judge me. One night, we walked through the zoo to a large building, and entering, Steve said, "Stay away from their trunks, they're very dangerous." Along the aisle, dimly lit with a security light, I could see 2 huge elephant trunks waving back and forth. Whoosh, sounds of breathing filled the air. Steve guided me to Kita, the smaller elephant. I was in awe as he greeted her. He told me to rub my hand on her tongue, and it felt very, very soft. I stared in her eyes, and reaching down, she untied my shoelace with the tip of her trunk. I marveled at this wild creature, so far away from where she was born, in a place that must have felt so confining. I saw myself in her eyes. I was living far from home. I felt so caged in, yet I still wanted to play too. Early the next morning, I saw a baby duck lying near death on the floor. I called Steve at his office and asked how to rescue it, and he said that was his turtle's breakfast, and it would eat it at some point. He said surplus offspring are always fed to the zoo animals. Then Steve told me he had ordered the keepers to cull several of those baby snow leopards right after our visit to protect the captive breeding program gene pool. I was shocked, remembering those little faces, and wondered what their mother felt. Seeing the alternative choice all around me at the zoo, I knew I made the right one. I had a child to raise, and this long-distance relationship with a much older guy had to go. I occasionally think of my time with Steve, who still has a room in my heart. But the biggest room in there belongs to my daughter. I raised her with plenty of space to make her own choices and a strong sense of right and wrong, Catholic or otherwise. I hope she feels she can tell me anything, no matter how awkward the situation might be. When I was 26, I had to go a bit wild for a while. Now my daughter is 26. People say she has a bit of my wild side in her, and I'm glad I was able to pass it on. There are still so many times in my life I find myself doubting whether I can deal with an obvious issue in my life. When that happens, I let that wild child in me out to play for a while and look the elephant right in the eye.